Let me just see, is that recording? Yeah, that is. Hi everyone, welcome to Kitchen Conversations from the Cookbook Festival. And we are very privileged today to have Joe Schneider of Stichelton. I can't say it, Joe. You've got to say it for me. Stichelton cheese.
Stichelton. Very good.
On the Welbeck estate in Nottingham. And Joe has just literally come from making his morning's batch of cheese, haven't you?
We have, yeah. Yeah, we made cheese this morning. So funny if you think about it. Yesterday it was grass. This morning it was milk. And now 2 o'clock it's curd sitting in the vat.
That's very interesting because reading up about you, you say you are in the holy grail of cheese making and you're a free agent cheesemaker because you are able to have a farmer, Graham, who looks after the herd, but gives you the morning milk when it's still warm, and you get to then, I can't say the word process because you're definitely not processing, you're artisanally making it into this gorgeous cheese that you sell worldwide.
Yes. Yeah, so we've been on Welbeck for 14 years. So we're in partnership with Welbeck. So everybody does their job. I make the cheese, Welbeck produces the milk. They're the experts at farming. And then our other partner, Neal's Yard Dairy, they sell it. So we've been here for 14 years, and when we first started, they didn't have enough cows to fill our vat with one milking. But over the years, the number of cows increased, and one of the things I was very excited about trying was just to use the morning's milk. But we had to wait until the cow numbers got up to a level where we could fill our vat with just that one milking. And that happened about 2 years ago. We've been doing that for a few years, and it was very exciting, that change. It made such a difference to the recipe of the cheese. And I was excited about it for some kind of geeky reasons. But when you make cheese with raw milk, you want all the natural flora that's in the milk. That you're allowing the milk to express itself by what's naturally in it. And if you chill milk, you make some of those bacteria unhappy. They don't want to be cold. They like sort of body temperatures. And so you change the balance a little bit. Whereas if you take milk straight from a cow that's never been chilled, the milk is in perfect harmony with the way it came out of the cow. And then you simply start making cheese with it and shepherd it along in its transformation from milk to cheese. So we've been doing that about 2 years, and it was quite illuminating, the change that it made to the cheese and flavor and texture. It was great.
That's incredible, because you started your cheese because Colton Bassett stopped using raw milk because of issues. And you and Randolph of Neal's Yard Dairy decided you wanted to use raw milk to make a quality cheese. You weren't allowed to call it Stilton, were you? So you had to come up with this name that comes from the Doomsday Book.
That's right. So just a few facts to put that in historical context. Stilton is arguably the king of English cheeses, ubiquitously known around the world as a very emblematic British cheese. And that cheese, Stilton, used to be made in the 3 counties, Nottinghamshire, Leicestershire, Derbyshire, on little farms with raw milk. For its first 150, 200 years of existence, that's how it was made. As the situation stands now, there are only five companies that are licensed to make Stilton. All of them are large factories, and all of them pasteurize the milk. So all Stilton, since 1989, is made with pasteurized milk. So we wanted to bring back a recipe that was extinct. Raw milk Stilton is extinct. It does not exist anymore. This quintessential British heritage cheese is no more. So the idea was that we would make a blue cheese on a farm with raw milk in that tradition. But when we asked there's an association that polices the name control on Stilton. It's called a PDO. It's a European legislation that controls the name of certain foods. we asked them if they would allow us to do that and help us make a raw milk version of that cheese, but they refused. And that's why we can't use the name Stilton, because we aren't a Stilton. We're not in the PDO, but we are in the 3 counties, and we make our blue cheese to a very recognizable recipe. I have to be very careful about what I say, because I'll end up in court if
I know. I'm glad you said it instead of me. Are you friendly with the Stilton? Are they appreciative of what you've done, or is it a bit awkward?
No, I think it's a bit awkward. They would much rather that we didn't do it, which is part of my disagreement with them, is that the Stilton Makers Association did not invent Stilton, and it doesn't belong to them. It belongs to, if it's not too corny, it belongs to the British people. Mm-hmm. So they're simply shepherds of a tradition, and they are using trademark law and PDO law as a barrier to entry for smaller producers. They don't want small little producers coming in and disrupting their market share, basically, is my view. So they have been obstructive in our quest to bring back this traditional cheese. Some of the cheese makers, I'm not going to name any names, but some of the cheese makers were professionally interested in what we were doing, because you couldn't not be as a cheese maker. But when they put their official hat on, they can't sanction it or condone it.
Okay, because what you're doing is absolutely magical. Because how far does the milk travel to your creamery?
20 feet. It's right behind me.
Okay. And throughout the seasons, the milk changes, doesn't it, according to the grass and yes, according to what the cows are eating, and the it's a real science, isn't it?
It's part science and part alchemy, I think. One of the things another hackneyed allegory or a comparison I like to make is we're like the single malt version of a blue cheese, because we only use our own milk. So we get all the highs and lows of that milk, that year, that week. So we only use milk from our own animals. So what I like is I've always made cheese with raw milk. So if you can see out my window, you'll see cows in the field. You can see it's raining today. So everything out that window, the cows, the grass, what they're eating, Graham, the farmer, how he's feeling that day, how he's milking, gets expressed in that milk. The soil, the vegetation, the weather, all of it gets expressed in the milk that we take out of the cow and move 20 feet into our vat. So if I pasteurize the milk, I completely cut all the connections that I've made with what's out that window.
Yeah. And
I don't want to do that. I want my cheese to be expressive of every single link going backwards to when it was grass in that field. So that's always been an important part of our business. And I never apologize for the variability of our cheese. It's one of the things that makes it difficult for a farmhouse cheesemaker to sell into multiples who are looking for consistency in packaging and profile. Our cheese changes throughout the year. Certainly want it to be good all year, but as the seasons change, the fat and the proteins change, we get a different kind of Stichelton in the winter, in the spring, and the summer. So I don't apologize for that. I like that because it exemplifies the connection to what's outside that window.
Yeah, I don't know if this is true, but having spent quite a lot of time in France, people always say that the sort of autumn and later autumn cheeses are better from the Alpine reaches because they've had the spring grass, which is much richer and more complex.
Well, for our cheese, spring grass is a nightmare.
Is it?
Yes. So we all have different farming systems, and in France, maybe you can turn your cows out earlier, or it's not as wet. But in England, when the cows are in all year, until farmers think, I'll turn them out in April, March, April, May, maybe. So they're on a winter diet, so they're eating silage or hay or something like that. And then they go out on lush grass that's full of moisture, not a lot of dry matter, and it drives the milk crazy. It goes up and down. So as a cheesemaker, it's very difficult to handle milk that's almost changing on a day-to-day basis. It's that summer and autumn milk that I like the most, when the dry matter's settled down, the cows are more adapted to it, and then you get really lovely milk. So anything from sort of July through September is the best milk for us.
And what do you classify as lovely milk? The fat content, or just the complexity of the flora of it?
All of that. I mean, the easiest thing to measure is the fluctuation in the fat and the protein. Yeah. That goes up and down. So like, for instance, our winter cheese, very low fat, sort of more acid, drier, and you get more savory, umami, meat juice kind of flavors. The cheese that we make in the late summer and autumn, very syrupy, sweet, lots of fat, breaks down nice and soft. And of course, those are the cheeses that are ready for Christmas. So that's why this type of cheese is associated with Christmas, because that's the best milk for it.
Yeah, talking of your cheese, the flavors that I was reading about, and obviously I have eaten it, is green apples to beef stock. And it's interesting that you mentioned the word umami there. Because
yeah, so I like going through the year, and you can taste the different profiles and those different flavors coming through.
And you don't make an awful lot of cheese by many people's standards, but you still make 50 tons plus a year, which to many people is a lot, but you're making it all by hand. There's no machinery involved.
Well, I wouldn't say that. We do use machinery.
Well, but you don't cut it with machines. You cut it by hand. You turn it.
We cut by hand. We ladle by hand, which is very important for that kind of recipe. And I'll just diverge with this. I have an anecdote that I tell. This kind of cheese is a very feminine type of recipe. So back in the old days, farmhouse cheese was usually made by farmers' wives. So the men would milk, then go out into the fields and do whatever. And then the women were at home with this vat of milk, and they had to turn it into cheese. But they have other jobs to do. They got to bake 30 loaves of bread, raise some children, feed the calves, all these things. So they can't have a recipe that needs them to focus just on that cheese for 5 hours straight. Doesn't work. They need something that's very slow and punctuated with periods of inactivity so they can go do other things. Now, when men get involved and they build factories and they put other men in those factories, the game changed. And this is well documented in British cheese making. So now you're paying people and you're looking for ways to shorten that time. You don't want people standing around doing nothing while they wait for milk to ripen or curd to set. You want everything shortened. So then most recipes became shorter and more masculine in that regard. But Stilton and the cheese that we make, Stichelton, resisted that evolution because you just can't get the same cheese if you try to rush it or do it quickly. And one of the things that they changed in many of the larger Stilton producers, they used machinery to shorten the time. Now, machinery isn't bad per se, but what's interesting is, say, the hand ladling. There's only two Stilton makers now. One has come lately that hand ladle, and Stichelton is hand ladled. The others do that with machinery, and they can't get the same texture. And you can imagine the poor cheesemaker when his bosses changed the recipe and said, right, we're going to get rid of all those hand ladlers because they're very expensive. And we're going to make a machine that will do that for you. And we'll just lift it up in the air and we'll let all this curd roll down a sluice and it'll take minutes. And that poor cheesemaker must have looked at his curd the next day and said, it's all broken and smashed. What do I do? And their response would have been, well, you need to make a tougher curd. So that's very interesting philosophically, because the machinery, the equipment, is dictating the recipe instead of serving the recipe. So if you need a piece of machinery that makes your life easier, you have to be very careful that it isn't changing the recipe somehow. So for instance, we use a machine that pierces the cheese, it pokes holes in cheese. But we wouldn't do that if we thought it would change the nature of the cheese. That's why we hand ladle, even though it's very laborious and expensive in labor. If we tried to do that mechanically, it would ruin the recipe. So I'm not against machinery per se, and the product is handmade, but we always look carefully that the technology that we're using serves our purposes and not, we don't become a slave to the technology.
Yeah, and it doesn't change your product, and your product still has the high standards that you're wanting. Could you just take us through the journey from milking to then adding the various things and cutting, just for those who don't know?
Yeah, so cheese is very interesting. If you think about it, all those different types of cheese that there are out there, hundreds, and very different, from Parmesan to a sort of a runny brie. There are only two controls that you can, levers that you can pull, and that is moisture and acidity. And that's it. And every single different cheese that you get comes from those two levers, pulling them in different ways. So in the morning, we take the warm morning's milk straight from the cow, put it in our vat. We're only going to add 4 ingredients on its entire journey. So the first ingredient is a homeopathic amount of starter culture, very much like you would add to your sourdough bread. It's a little bit of lactic acid bacteria. It goes in the milk. The whole process of making cheese is the natural bacteria will eat the milk sugar, the lactose, and give us lactic acid in return. And that's the fermentation process that preserves the milk. The second ingredient that we add is the blue mold culture, because we want our cheese to be blue. So that goes in the milk. And then we add the rennet, and the rennet sets the milk into a junket, like a loose jelly. And that's really the point when you leave milk behind and you're going down the road of cheese making, because as soon as I cut that curd, I've got curds in whey, so I'm getting rid of the moisture. So I want the solid part of the milk, and I want to get rid of the liquid part. So at that point, when we cut the curd, the milk has been warmed up. It's about 30 degrees. It's been in our vat for a few hours. As I said, our recipe is very slow and drawn out. We cut it into curds and whey. Our cutting is done by hand, and the pieces are quite large, like sugar cubes size, because we want more moisture in the cheese. And then we leave it alone for 2 hours and let it sink and firm up a little bit. And then we hand ladle it with these big sort of stainless steel scoops and ladle all of the curd in scallops, like very gently scallop off the top layer and put it into a draining table where it stays overnight. So this is very unusual for a British cheese variety. It's a 24-hour make from when you add the rennet to when you are milling and salting. So that curd just sits in its way overnight. It gets drained, and in the morning we take those blocks of curd, we break them up into little pieces and add the salt, which is the last ingredient, and then each cheese is made one at a time. So we make one cheese, add salt for one cheese, mix up one cheese, and make one cheese, and then move on.
Amazing. And you only make one size, don't you?
Yes. Yeah, those smaller versions, like the little minis or pots, the surface area to volume ratio is wrong, so you can't get a really lovely mature cheese before it dries out. They're just sort of gimmicks for gifty things at Christmas, but you just don't get a good mature cheese from that size.
You're really passionate about your making. Lovely, you can tell. You just want it done properly. You don't want to do any, as you say, gimmicky cheeses that people do. But I also was looking, so you then mature them and you spike holes in them. What do you put the holes? Are they copper? Are they just holes to get airs in?
Oh, so this is like the football scores, right? So I don't want to disabuse any of your viewers of some romantic notion that they have, because they do have romantic notions. So I've heard electricity, I've heard copper wire. So if you don't want to know the truth, turn away now. So, all we do is poke holes in the cheese with stainless steel needles. It's not the poking that does it, it's the air. So all you're doing is letting air in. The blue mold, the Penicillium roquefortii, is aerobic. It needs to breathe. So as soon as we poke holes in, it wakes up and starts turning blue. That's it.
Where's this copper story come from?
I don't know, but hundreds of people have told me that that's how it's done. And I have to say, no, that's not how it's done. And they don't believe me, you know, because their grandmother has told them something.
Yeah. Okay. But and then it matures, and it takes about 4 months to make one of your cheeses.
Yep. Yeah, depending on the time of year. So between 4 and 5 months. Yeah.
Amazing. And they're hand turned, and they're rubbed, and they're checked, and then the cheese, when you cut it, the outside bit has a different taste to the blue bit, and then to the center bit. It's sort of a journey, isn't it?
Mm. Yeah, it is. Which is one of the, you know, this whole project's kind of been a journey of learning for me. And one of the things that I was very familiar with was, you know, when we talk about raw milk, we're talking about all the natural flora of the milk expressing itself in the flavor of the body of the cheese. But what I was caught off guard by was just how complex the rinds were. So all the yeasts and molds and bacteria that are in the milk and in our environment where we are, they show up on these very vibrant, colorful rinds. And those yeasts and molds, they're not just hanging around doing nothing. They're breaking down the cheese, and they're giving you different flavors near the rind. So it's more like a washed rind cheese, very close to the rind, kind of broken down and soft and more sort of savory, beefy flavors. And then around the blue, one of the things we don't want, you know, blue can overpower the flavor so quickly. And we control that by how much we pierce. We don't want too much blue, because I want the background paste of the cheese to be the main flavor, accented by the blue. And it's actually the blue that makes it turn creamy. So if you taste it around the blue bits, you'll get very sort of piquant, maybe slightly, like if you've ever tasted maybe sort of a more mass-produced Stilton, you get that metallic,
high pitchy taste in
yeah.
your mouth.
That's because the blue is breaking down the proteins and making the cheese go soft. But at a certain stage, they break down these big, long strands of proteins into bitter peptides, and that's what you're tasting. So if you don't allow the cheese to mature beyond that, you're just left with that sort of bitter, metallic flavor that a lot of people associate with blue. So you got to move past that. And then the paste of our cheese, you know, everything that's happening outside of that window, all those flavors come through in that.
And you just haven't learnt your trade here, because you started making cheese back in 1995 in Holland. And then you actually ran the creamery, and I think possibly invented some of the cheeses at Dalesford Organics.
Yeah, so I was an American living in Holland, making Greek cheese for a Turk. That's on my CV. That's where I learned cheese making. But I got into cheese making by accident, but I liked it. It was a mix of good hard empirical science and a bit of alchemy, some mysterious bit that had to do with instinct and experience, which I loved, that this sort of way those two married up. And I thought, well, maybe I could do this as a career. And so I was looking around at different countries, thinking who's doing the best job of the kind of cheese I want to make. And it was Britain, hands down. So Britain had almost lost its farmhouse cheese making tradition in the 80s. Legislation was building up that it was making it more and more difficult to make raw milk cheese. People didn't have an understanding of the food safety issues. The government was trying to ban the use of raw milk. And there was an association formed as a reaction against that, with people like Patrick Rance and Randolph Hodgson and Arthur Cunningham and Julia Harbert, people that fought for raw milk cheese. And so by the time I knew about it, so this would have been in the mid-90s, there was a real renaissance of British farmhouse cheese making. because it had almost become extinct. And what I loved about it, if I went into a place like Neal's Yard Dairy, you see these huge objects like a Montgomery's cheddar, right?
Mm.
And you have like this lovely triumvirate of characteristics. So you have this traditional cheese from an area made by a person. Mrs. Montgomery's cheddar, Mrs. Kirkham's Lancashire, Applebee's Cheshire. I love that. That doesn't exist in Europe. They don't let you know who's made it. That's kind of obfuscated, say, by French affineurs, because they don't really want you to know where their secret source of the best camembert is. And I just loved that sort of that mixture of tradition and a region and a person behind the cheese. And I thought, that's the tradition I want to be part of. So in '98, I moved to Sussex. Worked on a little biodynamic farm there for 2 years. That's where I sort of cut my teeth. And then I went to Dalesford and I started the dairy there. I built that dairy. Well, it doesn't exist anymore. They've expanded beyond it. But
Big.
when Lady Beth, what's that?
It's big now, yes, but all still artisan and handmade.
Yeah. Well, if you've been, I was in that little low barn that was attached to the big farm shop barn. We started making our cheese there in 2006, and the farm shop opened a couple of months after we had made our first cheese. So the Dalesford Creamery was the first food business at Dalesford, and then everything else came after that. And I spent 5 lovely years there working for Lady Bamford, and I call him Sir Anthony, but of course he's Lord Anthony now, but he was Sir Anthony back then.
Yeah, I did some work with them, and I remember her telling me that you were the best person that ever worked there.
That's very kind of her. That's nice.
Yeah, she had nothing but praise for you and how you understood cheeses. But the British cheese scene, I've just got to say, is fantastic. We have such a variety of hard, soft, blue, and as you're saying, they have to be made by these people on small farms. Lots of people, the cheese they buy in the supermarket has no reality to these top-end British cheeses. Neal's Yard and a good cheese shop is the place to go. But you've been hit really, really hard by this COVID, but you made the most beautiful film. Tell me, who was the inspiration and art director behind that?
My daughter.
Really? Well, it's fantastic.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, it was fun.
I just said you have to go to the Stichelton's Instagram and just look back a few shots and you'll find this beautiful video, and it deserves to go viral. And everyone got behind the British cheese scene, and Joe was just going, help us, with little pages. And how old's your daughter?
19.
Okay, well, she did a grand job.
Well, she's much more au fait with the whole Instagram multimedia technology thing than I am. So, and I get uncomfortable sort of having a camera pointed at me and talking. And so she came up with this idea that we could sort of like a Bob Dylan ripoff, isn't it, from that video? And it was much easier for me because I didn't have to say anything. But yeah, she did a really good job. I enjoyed that.
And so are you filling up? When will you be able to have cheese for resale?
Well, after the Jamie Oliver and Neal's Yard Dairy promotion, so back in March, we stopped making cheese. I furloughed all my employees because restaurants closed overnight. The export markets died. Even domestic cheese shops, they took a while to adapt. They had to shut their stores, or they can only let 1 or 2 people in at a time. So sales just dropped off a cliff. We didn't sell anything for 3 weeks. And cheese doesn't wait, really. It's, a mountain of cheese behind you that's ripe and ready to go. And it's a lot of money tied up. So after that promotion, when Jamie Oliver did his Save British Cheese box, we had planned on, Neal's Yard had planned on selling 2,500 of those boxes in a week, and they sold out in 3 hours. It was incredible.
Wow.
Yeah, the response. Which for us, that was like 90 cheeses. That's 3 days make. So it used up a lot of cheese. And then after that, sales started to pick up again because Neil's Yard and our other customers, Fine Cheese Company, Courtyard Dairy, they had adapted, and now they're doing more of a mail order model, and the cheese was starting to go out again. And I think Jamie's video introduced not only our cheese, but farmhouse cheese to people who wouldn't normally buy that sort of cheese. So the sales have been okay since that video went out. The sales have been pretty steady. They've slowed down a little bit, but hopefully, yeah, we sold all the cheese that we had piled up.
Okay, so you didn't have to throw anything away.
No. Well, that's what I was worried about. I have friends, Jamie Montgomery gave away 3 tons to NHS workers just because it would be heartbreaking to throw it in a skip. You'd rather end up in somebody's mouth and they enjoy it, even though you get no money for it. But I do have some friends who just had to throw cheese away.
Really, that's very sad to hear.
Mm.
And just tell me, how many days a week do you make cheese on a normal week?
Yeah, well, it depends on the time of year. So normally at this time of year, we'd be making 2 or 3 batches a week.
Okay.
But we're making a little bit more to catch up. In the summer, we're making our Christmas cheese, and we make cheese 5 days a week. But because it's a 24-hour make, we have to come in for 6 days. So it's pretty busy in the summer. And then in January, we'll drop down again to 2 or 3 a week.
And is Neil's Yard your biggest sales place, or do you sell to?
Yeah, no, well, Neil's Yard Dairy is actually our partner. They, put up the money, and this was as much Randolph's vision as mine. And they take the lion's share of the cheese. They distribute it, wholesale it, export it. But we have some other customers that we sell to as well. But
you sell to America, New Zealand, France. You sell to many, many countries.
Yeah, we do. Which feels good because, well, take France for instance. French people are very regionally, fiercely loyal to their food. Often when I go to France and I sample my cheese out, I'm met with skepticism. English cheese? I don't know. But a French person every French person I've ever met, when they taste good food, they recognize it. Their prejudices go out the window. They're like, yes, that is actually good cheese. It doesn't matter where it comes from. So yeah, France is our biggest customer in Europe.
That is brilliant. Well, I wish you all the very best of luck. And I hope may you continue to just educate people to good cheese. Because it's delicious cheese. Can I just ask you 2 questions? And I haven't pre-ordered these. Your favorite recipe using your cheese?
Favorite recipe with my cheese? Well, I'm not above melting it on a burger. Maybe it's an American. Or a little bit more upscale. How about on a nice barbecued steak?
Okay. And who is your food hero, or a book or a film or a podcast that you like?
Have you ever read the book or seen the movie Like Water for Chocolate?
Yes. Yeah.
That's brilliant. I love that story. I love the story that food could somehow carry the emotions of the person who made it and then pass it on to the people that are eating it. That's a lovely idea.
That is fantastic. And do you have, actually, I'm not going to ask you because I put you on the mark. Joe, are you still there? Oh, hello.
Yep.
You're still there. I was going to ask you your favorite kitchen tool, but maybe you can just tell us your tasting stick. What's it actually called when you test the cheese?
Yeah, we call it a cheese iron.
Okay, it's just a cheese iron.
Yeah, and I have a collection of those. Some are quite old and lovely. And I've got a lovely collection of cheese knives that I've collected over the years that are in my kitchen that I love.
And do you get very upset when people cut the nose off a cheese?
No.
No.
No, I'm not precious about it. If you've bought it and you're enjoying it, you may cut it however you like.
But I do think you don't get the journey of the flavors.
No, that's true. Yeah, so if you do cut the nose off, you're just, actually the nose is probably the worst place on a piece of Stichelton, because if you think of the round wheel, when the spokes of the needles go in, that little center bit is the bluest and the harshest bit. So really, because all the needles meet there, that's probably not the best place to, that wouldn't be the choicest bit of cheese. So I would aim for more for the middle and then move towards the rind.
Okay, okay. It's been brilliant having you, Joe. Thank you very much for taking time out of your busy cheese making life.
That's my pleasure.
Fresh from the farm with all the cows just behind you and sharing your stories. Thank you
Oh, it's
very much.
nice to have a chat.
It's very nice to see you.